was going to say good evening, but good afternoon. It's been a long day, but you guys are brave that it's still hanging in there. So, uh, First thing, as I was preparing my slides, and I've been listening to the panels throughout the day, which has been really insightful. I think one thing we learned from Monit, I think he was talking about building agents and making sure these agents can integrate well together. Well, Monit stole my thunder about half of my slides. So, so between the, if you consider each panel an agent, we need to do a better job in terms of making sure the agents are seeing what's happening. No, but one of the first things that I asked my dear associate Katia, who was one of the first speakers to check my slides when I was putting it together a few days ago, she came back and she said, "What's the relationship between this and sustainability?" I said, "The slides are green." That's the, that's the only thing I could find. No, no, no. Now, at the end of the day, we all know that if we build efficiency and um, productivity factors into a variety of resource pools that, especially heavy in financial services, we can definitely, tie it back to, um, you know, uh, efficiency that ties into sustainability and green energy. But generally speaking, my context setting, and not to repeat all the other agents, amazing discussions on various topics. My discussion is going to be obviously with the lens of financial services, and and then of course I'll spend a few minutes just talking about the guardrails and compliance, which you've heard it from multiple panelists, but I'm just going to again focus on what the regulators or what financial services industry is looking at. So let's take a step back. How many of you work in banking or financial services? Okay, so a few of us. I was a consultant most of my career, but I also serviced majority of, I would say, most of Wall Street banks, from Goldman and Citibank. I was actually at Citi for a while full time, but I worked with a lot of banks, so I know enough to be dangerous in terms of understanding how the banks operate. But some of us that are not in banking, they may kind of not be confused a little bit about fintech versus banking. Well, if you look at it from the traditional models, financial services, which is an overarching umbrella, you can break it down into three different sectors, right? Investment banking, which is the fastest paced, higher risk takers, retail banking, and then insurance. That's the way we kind of break up the financial services. Fintech, however, they could have been the startups, or still are, that come up with really some cool products that the banks can actually use. The best example is you and I. If I'm sending money to you, I'm not going to go to my bank account and initiate a money transfer, wire transfer, which I used to do back in the days, or go to my bank and initiate a wire transfer. What do? I use Venmo, I use Zelle. These were fintechs that were adopted into banking. So they were able to, with their agile and high speed product development, less regulated, the most important, they were able to come up with something really cool. And the banks say, oh my God, if I don't buy them or use them, I'm going to lose my traditional heavy product set. So that has become the process. But if you look at it from a standpoint of things that we've been discussing, and I'm the old school. I was a programmer from, I don't know how many of you have heard of Fortran or COBOL or assembly language. So I go back to those days, and I'm really in the middle of amazing talents because I work in education now, which is perfect time of my career, where I'm actually seeing amazing talents in terms of technologies and adoption of digital age. And I see that sometimes when I put my old hat on, I think of things that are still very foundational. I was telling Patty earlier this morning that when you hear about all these sophisticated words in AI, at the end of the day, if you think about it, garbage in, garbage out. We learned that very first back in the days. That's called, poison data, right? And in cybersecurity, actually, since the threat landscape is evolving with AI, especially in banking, which is really important because they're highly regulated, they didn't care about data poisoning as an attack surface or attack method. Today, now we are looking at how do I actually build guardrails or controls around different layers of the stack to be able to manage that type of an attack. So things are very, at the foundational level, are very similar. If you go back to the basics, and I saw Monit, I think, laid out a pretty nice layers of the architecture in terms of how you build agents, if you remember two sessions ago. But to me, it's very simple. You got the data, which, as I said, if you don't manage your data, if you don't know how it's sourced, what's the integrity of the data, and how do you make sure that the data that your AI is going to learn from the data that is accessing, right? So that's basically that. The other thing is algorithm. I actually, as I said, I coded, but I also was a software engineer even in my higher education. So there is no such a thing as zero defect software. That we've learned many years back. Even the top organizations would tell you that. So obviously, when you're looking at the algorithms, the models that are being developed, there is no such a thing as zero defect. So we have to watch out for that because I'm getting more close to the concepts of compliance and guardrail. And then, of course, where is all this going to be running off of? We call that a platform, right? Infrastructure. We know that there are some challenges with energy and power because AI is consuming a lot of that. So it's forcing us to kind of think different topologies in terms of building our underlying infrastructure. Going back to, again, 1970s and 80s, we went from centralized to decentralized to cloud computing to edge computing. And whenever these type of major shifts in platform goes through the process, you have to think simple. Where is my data at? And where is my application processing at? And who are the people that are actually part of that process? And what are the workflows that are embedded into the process? So it's a lot of that. But one thing that I wanted to talk about, and maybe my dear friend and the next panel speaker is going to talk about Kiran, about humanity. I was reading a book on super intelligence recently. I have like 5 or 6 different AI books in front of me every day when I'm watching TV. I'm getting bored. I start reading. So I'm learning stuff that is being discussed by smart people too. And one of the points that is worrying people is, okay, we write the code, we program AI. Today, as human, we are still in control. But what happens when AI becomes smart enough to write its own code? So there are predictions about the end of humanity, and there is predictions about superintelligence. I'm not going to be telling you if that's going to happen now or in the future, or if it's ever going to happen. So there's a lot of we don't know what we don't know. But one thing that makes sense, common sense, tells you that if you don't build your machines, your computers, your systems, with some boundaries and guardrails, the way AI is behaving right now, as people, we are always want to be selfish as humans, saying that, oh, creativity, out of the box thinking, passion, all of that, guess what? AI is going to get good at it. What is creativity? Creativity is basically you've got a normal set of thought process and you want to think out of the box. Well, don't you think AI can do that in the future or even now? Do some prompting and say, do me this. And then when you get the response, do it some other way. Do it something that you've never done before. You'll see some response. I'm not saying like you'll get the perfect result, but these things are going really fast and we need to start putting our thinking around how to define the boundaries based on the set of objectives or goals, and then what are the guardrails that goes with it. So I think with that said, the thing that we need to start looking at it from a standpoint of what matters in agentic AI. So, I think I'm not going to spend too much time in here. We know that because last panels have talked about what is the difference between agentic versus the traditional automation. Automation is all about rule-based, and it's done in a number of ways. And how many of you have implemented RPA, robotic process automation, in your organization? Okay, just one? All right. RPA has been around for many, many years. When I was in consulting, I was actually part of implementation of RPA, as well as the fact that, we did some audit of RPA because I worked with some of the audit firms. So it's not a new thing, RPA, but it does use bots to automate a set of predefined functions to build efficiency that traditionally human had to do. So it's one of the examples of automation that has been working for us very well, but what we do now with agentic AI, we create things that are not just box automation to orchestration, which is basically taking a certain set of products like you see on the screen, like trade operations or onboarding or loan processing. These have been automated for many years. Now, with the use of agents that are able to plan, choose, and act, and then ultimately create these workflows that are evolving into more efficient way of doing things, you can actually leverage the agents to take your product to the next level. And the ideal situation, as it has been discussed multiple times by the prior panels, is that you don't let AI run by itself. At least in financial services, regulators will not let you do that. They're going to be watching you. I remember when I was at Citibank, in order for a product to go from ideation to the production, it would take a couple of years because they had a whole stringent gold certification mandated by the regulators to make sure that all the checks and balances are done. Same thing here. You have a lot of interaction between human and agents. And actually, if you look at, and again, re-emphasizing what has already been said, in order for you to do a good job is to really define, we call it the RACI diagram, define, what is the role of the human versus the agent in the context of a business process. So if you can come up with that kind of a workflow that the human is embedded into the function, then that would ultimately make things much more efficient. So that's where the human interaction is in terms of various aspects of use cases, such as like portfolio management, where the human defines the goals and risk appetite, and then the agent would then analyze the market, which is much faster than human, make trade suggestions and adjust the strategies accordingly. So you can see some good examples of how the human interaction is with the agents. And then as it relates to the governance, as we get closer to the end of my quick talk, is how do we actually establish the right transparency, fairness, boundaries and responsibilities, and building trust through making sure that the system as a whole is explainable and trustworthy. And don't forget, trust building is not automatic. It grows when AI is explainable, when there's a human oversight, and when the teams are designed in a way that there's a feedback mechanism. We went to the moon when? 1962? 69, you're right. So why do you think we have commercial airlines flying without a pilot? You don't think technologically we could do that? We definitely can have flights without a pilot, pilotless flights. But why do you think we always have a captain and a co-pilot? Because of the trust. We don't trust 100% to systems, and that's not going to change. Even if the airlines want to do it, FAA is not going to let it happen. So there are certain things we are bound against certain situations. So trust in terms of being able to drive certain things. So when you're dealing with AI and building these systems, especially in financial services, particularly in financial services, the talents that we want to bring into these organizations is not just to understand the data or to be able to code, but understand the ethics. They should understand different aspects of oversight, augmentation. These are the things that has to be embedded into these new talents. So how do you upskill in AI? It's not just learning how to code. As a matter of fact, if I take a survey of this room and ask you how many different ways you have or you are using AI, you'll probably come with a handful of different ways, from using ChatGPT as a search engine because I don't like Google anymore, to maybe somebody said this morning I use it to map out my rock climbing, or if I want to do a So there's so many different sort of use cases, but guess what? It's not even 1% of what the use cases will be in the future. So what I'm trying to say is, you got to kind of understand your interaction model based on your role, based on your own individual personality, from a 360-degree view. And then once you know what that role is, we basically then have to identify the responsible and ethical behaviors associated with that role. That's as simple as it gets, because you can't really put your arms around this thing. It's going too fast. Hopefully it's not going to end the humanity with super intelligence, but whatever your interaction model is with AI, you need to stick with it from an ethical and responsible perspective. So let's just go ahead and, because of my time limitations, wrap up. I'm not used to talking for 10 minutes, but quickly, in terms of regulatory, we've talked about what are some of the key areas that the regulators are looking at, transparency, auditability, I think, go right here. Making sure that your AI is explainable with different, there are different things that the regulators are, watching out for. Like, have you heard of AI washing? Like a lot of these, trading and investment banking organizations, they started saying that we got the AI built into our engine, so we are smarter to provide better service, where actually there was no AI in there. It was automation, going back to our previous definition. So you have to, the regulators are actually saying, like, because they're going to falsely attract new customers, so you want to make sure that you're not getting AI washed news updates or capabilities from their marketing perspective. And if I'm just going to fly through. So we've talked about compliance programs such as KYC, AML, or fair lending, privacy stuff. Model risks, risk management is obviously one of the major lenses of AI and in financial services. That's why we have various types of risks, from operational, financial, IT, and so on and so forth. So those are all important things that we need to pay attention to. At the end of the day, the guardrails are again based on those characteristics. What's your engagement model, interaction model with AI, and then how do you audit and how do you explain? And then obviously the regulators are on top of you when it comes to the prep. So the final slide that I wanted to just recap is that treat AI as a digital colleague. It's not just a tool, as it's been said already, but a digital colleague in a way of being able to create that kind of a racy diagram between what's my role and what's the AI's role, and how do we make sure that we have a nice handoff between each other, and what is the sort of a feedback process, supervision, validation, things like that. And and making sure that you're investing in trust, talent, and ethical design. So as you're teaching people how to build AI models, or be able to really drive those initiatives, don't forget, back in the days when we were doing coding, we didn't think about defects or tests until we went to the testing phase. Now this whole concept of shift to the left is design, secure by design, or privacy by design. Everything is kind of like bring it up to the beginning of the roadmap. Same thing with the type of talents that you want to build out. And I think that those are some of the key points that we've touched on already. So with that said, I'm just going to go sit down and have the rest of my panelists join me. Thank you.
One question. So I I know some of like Microsoft, they are doing like AI modeling to aid the future governance, like government operations, as well as like financial like system. Like so far, for example, like the foreign exchange, they already have like all kind of like AI automation or like modeling. So I'm asking whether in the future we'll see more and more AI taking over the government daily works as well as the financial daily work. So instead of like we see like currently like stock price going up and down, we know it is backed by human, and in the future it might be like all AI like buy and sell in the market.
Yeah, I mean, the regulators or government, why do you think they exist? They exist to protect the rights of the people, the fairness to the whole process, right? And that's why they exist. So they're always going to be looking at it from the other side of the coin, making sure that any technology, including AI, which is more difficult to predict because there is a lot of black box kind of a situation in it. So the regulators are always going to take the conservative route. Just the same thing that happened to like the digital currency and bitcoins, as an example. I remember I used to go to conferences 25 years ago that talked about, is that going to be legal or not? And it's still, that whole area is very questionable in terms of its current state and future, but make significant progress there because over all these years they were able to convince the regulators how to manage, how to establish that the trust is tying it back to the public. So I think that with AI it's going to be the same thing. It's going to take some time, but for sure it's going to happen because that's the way we live in a digital age, so we have to get used to incorporating these types of technologies to make our lives